Remember the last time I read a Christian historical romance? Me too. Remember me raging about it for over an hour? Let's read another one! Hi, my name's Rachel, and today we're discussing the Christian historical romance Holding the Fort by Regina Jennings. This was requested by my patron, White Raven 13. This is about a woman who loses her job as a saloon singer at the Cat Eye Saloon and fakes being a teacher, a governess, so she can work as a pretend Mennonite governess for a hot cavalry officer in 1800s Fort Reno, like 1886, I believe. But this is mostly to check on her ne'er-do-well brother, also in the cavalry, who has gotten himself into some shenanigans again with that same hot cavalry officer guy who's a father and conveniently a widower. And then she becomes a Christian. Yay! I am only human, so when I enter a book, I'm going to have bias, as we do. I have to particularly check myself when it comes to reading about the religion that I was a part of to figure out, is this bad? Or is this just a different set of beliefs than I currently hold? But there are some Christian books I think are fine, a good time even. Some I think are a great time. Some I think are perpetuating harm. Some I think are dangerous. And then some that I just don't like but have to interrogate within myself. Is this bad unenjoyable or bad because the religious beliefs espouse something harmful, or are they just rubbing me the wrong way as an ex-religious person? This book is a bit of a mixed bag. Now, I will say, if we were to take out the Christian stuff, this book would honestly still stand on its own plot-wise. Do not take me the wrong way. In a way that Redeeming Love cannot, because this was written to entertain Christian women, whereas Redeeming Love was written to, I believe, the authorial intent there was written to and did teach a generation of women and girls about gender roles. Premise-wise, I can get down with the idea of holding the fort. And I think you can too, because we have a very Sound of Music type setup here. Maria, a rather musical gal, instead of leaving being a nun and taking a break of being a nun to go teach a widower's children and teaches them songs, Louisa was never a religious person and got the job because a Mennonite governess got hay fever and she just sort of took over. But then she does go on to teach this widower's children about song. Old girl just needed a job because the Cat Eye Saloon kicked her out, gave her the boot. I feel like there's a pun there. I can get down with a working girl just trying to save her money, better her circumstances. I've been trying to do that as well, and something that helps me to save money is today's sponsor, which is Rocket Money. Rocket Money is the all-in-one personal finance app that helps you stick to a budget, lower your bills, and cancel unwanted subscriptions. I would still be paying for Instacart if not for Rocket Money. Rocket Money helped me cancel that subscription and 2 others, and with that a few extra dollars, I had more money for my bad or at least mid book buying budget, with which I bought the audiobook that we're about to talk about today. It's my bad book budget. Rocket Money safely and securely identifies unwanted charges, and it will even cancel subscriptions for you from the app, so you don't have to make phone calls. I know you hate them. So just a few taps and I have canceled unwanted subscriptions. They also let you know if you can lower bills that you're currently paying for. They lay out everything that you're subscribed to, tell you if you're paying for it every month, bi-monthly, every 6 months, so you know exactly where your money is going, and it helps you create a budget that works for you.
Rocket Money has helped its customers save up to $748 per year when they use all the app's premium features.
With over 500 million in canceled subscriptions. Save more and spend less by joining the over 5 million subscribers using Rocket Money, and you can do that today by clicking the link down below or by going to rocketmoney.com/readswithrachel. Click the link in the description to get started for free, and you can also unlock more features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/readswithrachel to get started today for free, and thank you so much to Rocket Money for sponsoring today's video. Let me give you the synopsis, and then we're going to talk a little bit about a more abstract concept. No, abstract's not the word I'm looking for. We're going to talk about the theme of Christian romance, because this book, I gave it a 2 for 2 reasons. It is better than Redeeming Love, which was so bad and so harmful in my opinion. I'll leave a link to my review down below if you want to watch it. I think that this had some issues with stereotyping Native Americans. I assume that this did not have a sensitivity read at all. There's no way that Bethany House Christian Publishing cares about being sensitive towards marginalized groups. Bethany House, forever on my shit list. Eat it. However, I do think that this actually had a plot. Problem is that I don't like how much we relied on miscommunication as stakes here. And this is often something that happens in Christian romance because they can't do like really explosive things because a lot of these things lead down to conversations that are more worldly, which is what they would call them, where somebody has to sin in order for there to be stakes. So just miscommunicating means nobody really fucked up and there's still drama, but it's just a simple misunderstanding, or it's that the sinner lied about something and it's not a huge deal and the person's already forgiven her anyway. Which is, we're doing both of those here. Let me give a synopsis. When dance hall singer Louisa Bell visits Fort Reno to see her brother, she is mistaken for the governess that harried Major Daniel Adams is waiting for. Did I call him a captain earlier? I might have. I don't know. I was not listening to all the old-timey military stuff here. Between his rowdy troops and his 2 daughters, he has more responsibility than he can handle alone. Why do I sound like Disney Channel in 1997?
Hey, I'm Hilary Duff from Lizzie McGuire, and you're watching Disney Channel.
Eager for the opportunity, Louisa sets out to show the widower that she is a perfect fit. This honestly kind of now sounds a little bit like the synopsis to a porn. So even when Christian books are not harmful, many of them I end up rating lower because they are unenjoyable. Because of the way that they are written. Again, miscommunication being the central conflict between characters themselves becomes exhausting. And we do that several times here. One of the primary criticisms of Christian media, at least on this channel, but elsewhere as well, like I watch a lot of like reviewing Christian movies. It's like my primary use of YouTube is to watch people review Christian media, especially when non-Christians do it and they're like, what is going on here? And I'm like, I understand the underlying thing here and I'm not going to explain it to you because you're going to be horrified when I tell you. The oversimplification of moral dilemmas is often something that gets made fun of in Christian movies, especially like Christian Christmas films. Oh my gosh. Characters are typically in Christian media. Oh, and also Christian children's media. Every focus on the family drama is like this. There's characters that are facing these like very clear-cut decisions between good and evil, and it's predictable and it has very like straightforward resolution. The protagonists though themselves are always mostly or completely morally upright. So like our main character, Major Adams here, is like morally upright in the most like absolute way. Whereas Louisa, who is on her way to becoming a Christian, has lied about some stuff and then, you know, she basically like apologizes, says sorry, accepts Christ, the end, right? With some romance along the way. And then when there is an antagonist, which there's not really in this book, they are characters with very little depth. So this very binary portrayal of good versus bad in Christian media is exhausting. So when there's no villain at all and it's just relying on miscommunication entirely for the stakes, it's real boring because life is full of moral grayness. So these like very simplistic narratives feel detached from reality and they don't typically reflect like actual people. They reflect the kind of people that Christians wish we could be. It's idealistic, which ends up making you feel like, damn, I'll never be like this because I am a complicated person, as is mostly everybody. It's not a drama-heavy redemption story, but it's a redemption story nonetheless because she lied about something. A drama-heavy redemption story is absolutely, it's in the title, redeeming love, which she needs to be redeemed for having been forced into sex trafficking as a child. I truly hate that book so much, but more so, I hate everybody in the comments, and I mean this, I hate all of you who are explaining to me why that was actually okay for Francine Rivers to write. It's actually not okay. It was wrong. It was fucked up, and it fucked up a generation of women and girls. And you are wrong for supporting it. Also, especially fuck the people who show up being like, you just didn't understand it. Then explain it to me slowly. Go ahead. I spent an hour reviewing it. What you got? The narratives in Christian media, are meant to be uplifting, but they, again, humans are complex and they just gloss over the complexity of being a human, the real struggles that humans face. In real life, the process of redemption is so complicated and it's not, like a very linear journey, and sometimes involves failure, which these stories never do. A really interesting story about redemption, though I say that and like it's very complicated and nuanced, is this book, which I'm still thinking about like every day, Eli Saslow's book about Derek Black, where he talks about Derek Black, who was set to inherit the white nationalist movement until Derek was, well, a lot of people that Derek was at college with decided to try to unteach all that Derek had learned in the white nationalist movement. And the thing about this sort of redemption is like the thing the book does so well is it opens the conversation to like, when you're being redeemed for something that bad, can you ever be? And also, whose responsibility is that to try to work to get you on that path? Because Derek never would have been on that path if it weren't for the people who diligently sat down with Derek and tried to unteach all of that nonsense that Derek had learned in white nationalism. So there's so much nuance there, and it's not like a clear-cut, like, this is what we must do answer. You learn many different things from it, and that there are no clear-cut answers. So the absence of that kind of nuance in Christian media creates like this very, especially like growing up, fundy for kids who soak up this media, sense of like very shallow optimism. And it works very well for kids who don't experience a ton of hardship, but then when they run into hardship, when they're dealing with huge issues that are like huge for kids to deal with, grief, loss, death, sickness, abuse, it doesn't resonate for them. So it begs the question, like, who'd you write this for? And I'm talking about like Christian media in more of a broad sense, not particularly this book. We'll get to the specifics of the book in a bit. So another factor that contributes to this like very shallow nature of Christian media is that reliance on predictable formula, which this book in particular, Holding the Fort, absolutely does. So the predictable formula is the theme is always like forgiveness, salvation. Often, it's framed within like the best way for you to be redeemed, the only way for you to be redeemed is through the Protestant belief of, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. This author in particular is a Baptist. And in that circle, which I didn't grow up Baptist, but we're in like we're under like a similar umbrella, and then there's like larger umbrellas on top of that, right? So she and I are sort of under a same umbrella. And this umbrella, they believe that they have monopolies on things like joy, peace, and redemption. But then they're so bad at writing it. And this typically ends up being the theme in every single book that these people write. So if I'm to read another Regina Jennings book, it likely, and I'm not saying it is, but likely what ends up happening is that it'll be just the same theme in a different font. So as a result of doing this, like the same thing over and over and over, the emotional stakes start to feel low when you read and consume a lot of Christian media. I mean, there's just so little variety in Christian media in general. Like, sure, there's genre variety, but what they do with those stories is typically the same thing over and over and over. Typically, the formula is character experiences personal crisis, character experiences spiritual awakening, especially if they are influenced by a Christian character, and ultimately overcomes challenges, or, big or small, by turning to faith or while turning to faith. And what ends up happening, and I have said this before, when I talked about, like, I read a couple of Christian dystopias last year. Often, I wouldn't say with Holding the Fort, but often with Christian media, it feels like it's definitely the truth for redeeming love also. These stories feel like a vehicle for moral instruction in a way that feels so inhuman. Like, when we're teaching ideas and themes and having conversations, you want to remember human complexity and explore the theme while also simultaneously exploring human complexity. And that is lost on Christian media writers, apparently. So that's why these forms of media lack the richness and complexity of what I would say are high quality books, because it's not like this for all religions. One of my favorite books is Love from A to Z, which I don't think I have ever talked about on this channel. I need to make like a favorite young adult romance video, because this is such a high quality book and the main character is Muslim. But this is not a book that is trying to teach you a moral lesson in the way that a young adult Christian romance would be. So I do think that Christian media could be as good as things like Love from A to Z, and I'm not really sure why they don't try to be better in evangelical Christianity. but I think that they cater to like a very specific audience most of the time. Sometimes they're trying to persuade you into fundamentalism, and because they don't really engage with broader, more diverse perspectives, they don't know how to write plurality and humanity. God, that I feel like I'm saying that phrase every day now lately. So Christian media ends up feeling very like insular, and it's disconnected from so many different cultures. Even within the US, there's, you know, so much variety of culture, and Christian media is very disconnected from Christian media written here in the US, published here in the US is so disconnected from so much of the culture, even though they think that they are for everybody. But they also don't want to be for everybody, because then they're going to feel like, oh, I'm being too worldly. But then that lack of engagement with like nuanced concepts because of fear of not wanting to be worldly ends up shooting them in the foot, because then they're missing out on converts because all of their media feels very low stakes and shallow. They tend to prioritize like staying in their comfort zone over challenges, because with challenges, especially to faith, that causes questions to be brought up. A lot of these, like even like the books and the songs and the movies and everything that we do is to reassure us that our faith is correct and right. Our faith, not in it anymore. Stop saying that. And so like this message is comforting, but why do you need that comfort? Because you are inherently questioning. Life does not always need to be comfortable and reassuring. Faith does not always need to be comfortable and reassuring. Struggling with deep questions of doubt, not the shallow ones that are in Holding the Fort. Confronting difficult and conflicting like things should be central to like every faith, including the Christian experience, but they avoid delving into these beyond, again, that like surface level, because I think a lot of this is assumption based on what I know from being in that community for 20 years. If you question, you are likely to have people leave the faith, which is certainly what happened to me. But the fact is that your life and your problems in your life are not going to wrap up easily where the primary conflict is, oopsie, he mistook my brother for my beau, and I just misunderstood how loving God actually is. So Christian media being basically like the Hallmark Channel all the time, just this like feel-good, easily digestible content, ends up inadvertently contributing to a very shallow idea of what it means to live out your Christian faith, because we don't live in a shallow world. We live in a very complex world. So the absence of deep, thought-provoking challenge leads to this very false sense of security. Your house is built on sand, as we like to say in the fundy community. Not we, damn it. It limits your potential for growth when you feel unstable all the time. And again, they're shooting themselves in the foot by not reckoning with that instability, with those doubts. They teach you like platitudes and things to remind yourself to sort of like tamper down the doubts rather than like really wrestling and grappling with them. Or they present these doubts as like this very shallow thing so that it's very easily defeated, and then you just move on. So some of those issues are why I rated this a 2-star. I do think that this is far less preachy and further less harmful than Redeeming Love, because Redeeming Love did try to grapple with those harder concepts and preached what I think is a disgusting and dangerous message. This one played it safe, did what I think is a little bit of stereotyping of Native Americans, though that's, I'm not Indigenous, so I can only tell you what I read and what I think might have happened here that I don't think was appropriate, but I can't tell you for certain. So I gave this 2 stars. Let me go through the whole thing and rant about why, and point out where I do think that the book did some stuff okay. Like I even laughed at one point. Not like a good hearty chuckle, but like a haha, at least that. Redeeming Love didn't do that. So we're in Wichita, Kansas in June of 1885.
That, my friends, is the American West. A disgusting, awful, dirty cesspool of despair, and all of it.
Why don't you shut up?
You shut up.
And our main character, Louisa, a singer at the Cat Eye Saloon, it really lays it on thick with the, historical verbiage, and also trying to tell you, hey, by the way, she's a singer, with lines like, Louisa delicately placed her hand against her bare-boned polonaise and crescendoed her way into the next stanza. She feels like this is the only job that she can have. She's sort of an orphan. Her mom, who was, it seemed like maybe possibly a sex worker, but definitely an alcoholic, wasn't super nice to Louisa. Louisa's brother is off in the cavalry
Cavalry. So she's just sort of getting by being a singer until the guy who runs the joint, which again is called the Cat Eye Saloon, Tim Bob, kicks her out. She needed a job to keep her head above water so she didn't sink to desperate measures. And we all know that those desperate measures are, once again, schmeck's work. There's nothing worse you could possibly do in a Christian book than schmeck's work. It even says that her mother's reputation had forever doomed her. And I'm like, damn, is it that serious? I mean, I guess with like social conventions at the time, but did we really need to go this direction? She gets word that her brother, Bradley, is in trouble again. He is just a regular bad choice Joyce, and he cannot keep it together despite having joined the cavalry.
Qualifications? Arson, armed robbery.
She's like, all right, I should go to Fort Reno where he's at and check on him. And she's told, no, don't go to Fort Reno. There's nothing but a passel of Almery cavalrymen and some irate Indians. Oh boy. There's no way you can help Bradley while he's under Major Adams. You've done all you can for the boy. Not yet she hasn't. She'll sing her way to everybody being okay. If only she could convince the U.S. cavalry that their troopers would benefit from some wholesome entertainment, or halfway wholesome entertainment. Even if she wasn't a respectable lady, Louisa had her standards. No drinking, no carousing, and no fraternizing with customers, even if all the women in town assumed she did. So the current climate of Fort Reno is that the cavalry's there. It's under the love interest, Major Adams' control. He's in charge over there. And it's also in the Cheyenne and Arapaho reservation. And so then we, of course, get some lines talking about how the Native Americans are less good than the colonizing settlers, which are the Americans. Another perceived attack on their way of life, and the Cheyenne might want to revive some of their other traditions that were better off forgotten. This was their land. Okay. This is dual POV. So then when we move over to Daniel's POV, Daniel is the Major Daniel Adams, which is the most like historical fiction romance name that I've ever heard. He's been dealing with Louisa's brother. He doesn't know Louisa, but he's been dealing with Bradley because Bradley is under his, what is it called? Bradley is his what is it called in the what's it called in the cavalry? I don't know. So like Carlos was in the Air Force, and if he was somebody's supervisor, then they would be called his airmen, like an airman under his jurisdiction. What is it called when it's in the cavalry? I don't fucking know. The U.S. Army needed men like Bradley Willis, Louisa's brother. Men who were brave, fearless, and, to be honest, just a little reckless. Sometimes Daniel envied his boldness. A widower with two daughters couldn't take the risk that Willis took. But that didn't mean Daniel wasn't brave. Oh, thank goodness you told us. And just because years ago he learned how to braid hair and play dolls didn't make him less of a man either. Well, yeah, that goes without saying. So for certain Christian circles, that would be like beyond what they would allow for men to do. But of course, like I have to look at it like, okay, I'm looking at this from my POV, which is men can do whatever they want, and that doesn't make them less of a man, which is a social construct. This is progressive for some Christian circles to say, didn't make him less of a man to play dolls, because in some Christian circles, they would consider it making him less of a man. So I get that the author is trying to be progressive, but at the same time, it's like, for me, it's like, okay, well, that kind of goes without saying. Thank you. His two daughters are Caroline and Daisy. Caroline is like 16, I think. I think Daisy might be, 11 or so. And they have a letter from their grandmother, who is his dead wife's mother, his mother-in-law. And basically the letter is because she wants the girls to come live with her, and I think she lives in Texas. And he's like, nah, I don't really want y'all to do that. And the younger daughter doesn't want to go, but the older daughter does. And he can't figure out how to teach his daughters, though. He can't figure out how to teach them, because he's a military man, and children don't operate the way that grown adults, men in the military, do. So it's so hard for it to compute for him. He couldn't use the same rules he used on cavalrymen. Oh my God, you don't say. These were problems that even a courageous man couldn't handle. They needed a woman to direct them, but ladies weren't readily available in Indian territory. Well, I mean, Native American women exist, but okay. His older daughter is bored as hell. She's like, living here is so boring. There's no one to talk to. There's no one our age. And the book solves this by giving them a stepmom. The younger daughter is like, I don't want to leave Dad. Pa. They call him Pa, of course. Little House on the Prairie over here, in like a literal way. And so he decides, all right, we need to send out for a governess, somebody who has to be able to like perform all of these duties that I don't really know how to do while I'm out performing my duties. And he specifically says charm and personality are unnecessary.
Boy, is he strict.
And then he gets the most charmful and personality-full woman at his doorstep. Better to hire a woman who'd earn her place through discipline than one who beguiled her employers with feminine manipulations. Oh, I hate that sentence.
Authentic frontier gibberish.
So Louisa, leaving behind the Cat Eye Saloon and her persona as lovely Lola, which is what her performance name is, she sets on the path towards going to Reno to check on her brother and try to find a job along the way at some point. Talks about how Louisa and Bradley, her brother, had barely survived their mother's abuse. When alcohol had brought an end to their mother's miserable life, Louisa continued to make money the best way she knew how, with her voice. But she's singing at saloons, which is, skirting the line on sinful. Ooh. She picked the most conservative pieces she could find, but that didn't keep her from looking like a soiled dove. She wished there were some way to let them understand the difference, but in most minds, if a woman performed on the stage, she was no different than one who performed in the bedchamber.
I don't understand. If you're not auditioning for Oklahoma, then why do you look like that?
Like what?
Like a country music star.
In a good way or a bad way?
Bitch, you better be joking.
So she's like thinking she's barely a step above a sex worker, which of course sex worker is the worst thing that you could be. Getting flashbacks to redeeming love. So she runs into Mrs. Townsend, who is the woman who is the Mennonite governess who Major Adams sent for. He sent for a Mennonite governess, and they, Louisa and her cross paths along the way to Fort Reno, and she's like, I have hay fever, I'm not going to Fort Reno. It mentions the Cheyenne people, the Cheyenne Native American tribe, and it says they're feeling their oats. And I had to look up what this meant because I've never heard that phrase before. And I was like, feeling their oats, is that like sowing their wild oats? I hope this isn't like a derogatory thing about sex. And apparently it means feeling frisky. So once again, I guess it's not a sex thing, but it's once again like reiterating like, oh, they're, these Native Americans, they have a short fuse, unlike us settlers who came in, and we are so much more patient and understanding. So she goes to Fort Reno.
Has anybody got a dime? I don't know. Somebody's got to go back and get a shitload of dime.
And immediately when she gets there, she runs into Daniel because he decided that he wanted to stand on the saddle of his horse to emulate her brother, to be more like cool like her brother, which was the stupidest thing in this book. He falls off of his horse, gets hurt, and Louisa comes upon him and like lays his head in her lap. Oh my God, the romance. Great Saturn's rings, she says, which is, I guess, the 1880 whatever the fuck version of oh shit. So he has like a very like Little Mermaid moment where he's like, wow, there was this woman, she was singing, she couldn't have been real. It's very literally that moment from The Little Mermaid, actually. It was obviously the product of his confusion. No one sang that beautifully, or looked that fetching, or dressed that sumptuously. Oh Lord, please make it stop. He's having unclean thoughts. Oh no. So she gets to Major Adams's house and meets his daughters, except she opens a door inside of the house and it says, she saw an Indian's face painted for war. Just reiterating once again how they are, so violent. Louisa's holler echoed. Yeah, so she's like, there's an Indian in there. We have to get Lieutenant Hennessy, who's like one of the dudes at the in the army. Well, it turns out that it's just Major Adams's younger daughter. She mistook an 11-year-old for a Native American ready for war because Daisy really likes to wear feathers in her hair and paint her face. I have to move outside because my son wants to be outside and I can't be all the way up in the upstairs area and not be able to hear him, so we're sitting outside. So immediately upon meeting these children, one of whom is Daisy, who really likes to steal Native American culture, and the other one, Caroline, who is on the precipice of womanhood. The more I talk about this, the more I realize that this is very Sound of Music. Like, it feels like lifted from Sound of Music, because Caroline feels so much like Liesel from Sound of Music, where she is like on the precipice of becoming a young woman. You are 16 going on 17, and she like desperately wants to be social, but she also is just a kid still, and she really wants to go live with their grandma, and kind of wants like this whole thing to get sabotaged with Louisa so that her and Daisy can go live with their grandma. Daisy tells like the only way to punish Caroline, Louisa says like they get into it like a verbal thing, and Daisy's like, oh, Caroline really loves her sweets, you could take her sweets away from you. Caroline's like, whose side are you on? And Daisy says, well, I'm on the side that lets us stay here at the fort. She finally meets Major Adams, and she's like, oh, this was the guy that fell off the horse. This was the guy that I bumped into. And she's like, oh my God, he was in my lap. Great Saturn's rings. She had to stop thinking about that, it says. And so he's like, you're not who I sent for. And she's like, well, has the Missionary Society ever misled you before?
Do we have the strength to carry on this mighty task in one night? Or are we just jerking off? Amen.
He's like, well, you're a replacement. Are you up to the task? You do seem to have all these books. Do you speak French? And so she speaks in French, but she speaks lines from a song that she knows in French. She can't translate it, but on a technicality, she speaks French and therefore makes herself look smart. Now, this part of the book I actually like. I like when we have like a ruse to keep up, or like, my curtains just attacked me. We have like a ruse to keep up. We're like, I'm masquerading as a governess to, you know, keep a job and check in on my brother. I don't hate this. I think that that's kind of cute. See, that's stakes. That's fun. So on Sunday, on like the following Sunday, he thinks to himself, I'm surprised that Miss Bell, she gives the name Louisa Bell, hadn't asked about Sabbath observance at the Fort Chapel. So she's really bad at passing herself off as a Mennonite governess.
I shall now read from the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Duck.
But he also notices that his chessboard, like somebody has been making moves on his chessboard. And he's like, did I do that and forget about that? Who else would have done it? And thus begins like them starting to play chess with each other, at first without him knowing it. Again, something that I think is actually cute. This is what was missing from Redeeming Love, is like these actually cute human moments. And I'm not saying that Redeeming Love had to be cute. It's just, it could have used some charm to balance out all of the bullshit in that book, if you know what I mean. And so like these things are charming. Passing herself off as a Mennonite governess, charming. Them not knowing that they're playing chess together, charming.
What do you like to do? Oh, I don't know. Play chess. Screw. Well, let's play chess.
What's not charming is the daughter dressing up as a Native American as if that culture is a costume. But so far, other than like demonizing sex work, and because Louisa is not a Christian, we can't demonize sex work using Christianity yet, so we just demonize sex work, period. I don't love that. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm not liking here so far. Louisa is walking around the house in a silk robe, and he sees her, and she's like, he thinks if anyone needed church at the moment, it was him. Haha, oh my gosh, not a woman in silk. She's probably like covered head to toe, and yet it's still not enough. Sorry if you can hear the bird. He's really loud. He's my mortal enemy. So Louisa's clothes situation is that most of her clothing is either like extremely conservative, or it's all of her stage performance clothing.
Wait, are you in the play? What play?
And she doesn't really want to wear either of it. The girls also need alterations, and so she says, I'm a decent hand at alterations. You wouldn't believe how many times I've made over my wardrobe. And he's like, you're a seamstress, you can alter them. And I'm like, wait a minute. So this is the Sound of Music. You're a seamstress, you can alter the children's wardrobes. I'm like, so this is just Sound of Music except set in 1880s Kansas? Is that what we're doing? That feels a little lazy. So then she's been working there for a couple of weeks now, and her payment is due. And so he says that he's going to pay her, and he ends up paying her more than she is supposed to get paid in order to test her to see if she'll be honest, because he's like suspicious of her because something's off. He can tell that something is off. My son saw a wasp, so we are back inside now. Also, that bird outside is driving me absolutely bonkers. So he has to basically teach her how to ride a horse because she doesn't know how, and he realizes, oh, maybe I'm just suspicious of her because she doesn't really know much about the world. No wonder she was at a loss so often. She hasn't seen much of the world. A wave of protectiveness surged through him. momentarily melting his suspicions. How well he could imagine her as the youngest child of a busy family, as the sheltered daughter of a doting father. It seemed strange to have her at this table with his family and not know anything about her own. So he asks her if she's written her parents about, her new job, and she's like, my parents? Why would you ask me that? You're away from home. They must care where you are. If Caroline were to go on a journey, I'd be waiting to hear from her. And she's like, I don't want to talk about my family, which is, so very not suspicious.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here?
So again, when he pays her, she's like, are you sure that this is right? She doesn't actually know the amount agreed to because she wasn't the governess that was called for. And so of course he tests her, which feels weird and manipulative. And he's like, she answered exactly as I hoped she would. But despite his suspicions of her, he starts to get more and more interested in her and she him. And they can tell that each other is interested. So out in Fort Reno, they run into her brother, and she doesn't want her brother to tell that she's his sister. She falls off her horse or maybe drops something, and her brother helps her up, and Major Adams is like, unhand her, and she's like, no, he's helping me, wink, wink, wink. Bradley stared at Miss Louisa Bell as if thunderstruck, and so he's like, oh no, they're into each other, when Louisa is trying to make Bradley seem like this really good cavalryman. What a nice guy. He helped up a lady. After such a gallant rescue, how can Major Adams think poorly of Bradley? But he does because he thinks that they are flirting. Anyway, they go into town to buy fabric, and the younger daughter, Daisy, says, have you ever been inside a teepee? I wish I lived in one. That feels inappropriate. It'd be so fun. A fire right in the middle, furs on the ground, and in the summer they're cooler than the house. Just throw a flap open and the breeze comes right in. And Louisa thinks the sight of the teepee still took some getting used to. Riding into town made Louisa nervous. Up and out the sidewalk stood groups of Indians. Most of the men wore white sheets wrapped around them. Here and there was a flash of bronze skin, feathers, and dark braids, or leather moccasins. But many of the Indian men preferred to stay hidden and peek out from the gap of their blankets. Others, however, had even less modesty than Louisa's friends at the Cat Eye. That feels inappropriate. She gawked at one man down the street in nothing but a loincloth and a whole palette of paint decorating his shining skin. The women wore leather dresses that covered them from neck to ankles. These dresses were adorned with every bauble imaginable, beaded jewelry, bones, ribbons, and rows of oddly shaped white buttons hung from their chest. Louisa appreciated the dramatic mix, as only a stage performer could. Well, it is not a costume, Louisa. Wasn't there a song about a desperate Indian maiden and her lost love? If she ever found herself on stage again, she'd love to fashion a costume like these. Not a costume. Major Adams thinks about the Native Americans, and it says, the more the Indians self-governed, the more content they were, which he figured was true for just about any group of people. And a indigenous man named Whitehorse, he is using sign language to speak to Major Adams, and he says, it's the cowboys going up the trail. They have paid for passage through the Cheyenne and Arapaho lands. They say that our people are stealing from them even though they paid. Arapaho say it's Cheyenne stealing the cattle. Cheyenne say the cowboys are lying, they are lazy, and the cows are running away. Lives had been lost over lust. Monitoring Indian territory was like watching over a lit match in a hut made of straw while standing in kerosene up to your knees. Disheartened Indians, displaced from their homes and made to live here, didn't feel the need to play by the U.S. government's rules. Well, at least it's, sensitive to the fact that they are, in fact, disheartened because they are displaced. Cowboys only saw open prairie, good grassland for their herds being driven to Kansas. How could someone own something so vast? Why should they pay to merely walk their cattle across it? Outlaws saw an uninhabited kingdom that would hide them from lawmen, and trigger-happy cavalrymen saw a threat in every uninvited rider in the territory. So there's some tension brewing because of the issues between the cowboys, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho. And this culminates in a conversation that felt very icky to me in the end, but okay. Louisa doesn't feel like she is really the right person for this job, but she, tries her best, and she thinks, does it matter so much that they needed a teacher more than a performer? And despite her lack of schooling, the girls did need her, as the day had proved. So did Bradley. He could hardly act irresponsibly when she was at the fort with him. Maybe she could be of help on a more permanent basis. What she wouldn't do for a home, a family, somewhere safe, but the risk, did she have the courage to remain at her station? So Major Adams offers her a permanent position and she accepts it. I'm honored that you're putting your trust in me. She was lovely Lola. She could enchant with her performance and make them love her show. Could she make them love her, though? Because she was already falling in love with this family. Her and Major Adams bond over their past a little bit. She doesn't tell him too much about her, but he explains that he went to go live with his uncle after his parents died. And she's like, oh, well, he didn't have parents either. Awesome. I'm not awesome, but like, you know, we have this in common. My father died of whiskey poisoning when I was 6 years old, and my mother of consumption not too long after. I moved to town with my uncle. Luckily for him, he could afford to hire people to take care of me so he didn't have to dirty his hands. When I was old enough to make it on my own, blah, blah, blah. For a while, I didn't care if I lived or died, really. I felt like no one cared what happened to me. Why should I? But then one day I met someone who showed me unconditional love. And she's like, oh, your wife? And he says, no, God. I met a God who loved me, made me, gave his son so that I could know him. That changed my life. I realized that I had a purpose. And so he stayed with his uncle to prepare himself for his future. He says his lot was hard with his uncle, but it saved me from compromising my convictions on the streets. He was so earnest, so full of belief, this didn't bode well for her. And he's like not understanding because she's not actually a Christian, but he's thinking, see, we have stuff in common. We have more in common than you think. We were both orphaned, but we both look to Christ to redeem our circumstances. Oh my God, a redeeming love. And she tells him that she was also orphaned, and he's like, well, hearing about your childhood in that way makes me think that you're the right person for this job. All that you've accomplished, you were orphaned, but you didn't turn to sin for easy money. But didn't she? No, she towed the line, according to this book. It would have been natural for you to rely on your looks, but you took the high road. You eschewed low connections, stayed away from unladylike professions. Oh, God.
This is 1874.
Despite your humble circumstances, you managed to procure an education, refined habits, and make something of yourself. Look at you, Miss Bell. You are a genteel, educated woman. That's something to be proud of. I honestly wish that this book would have grappled with the fact that this is all like very like social stuff. This isn't real. This is like what we consider to be a lady, and ladylike behavior is all just like social contracts that we put up with each other. But instead it's just like, well, she acted her way of being a lady into actually being one, and doesn't deal with the fact that like socioeconomic circumstances are a thing that people grapple with, and sometimes they make choices that just because you don't like doesn't mean they are actually bad. Anyway, in town they like she buys a brooch, B-R-O-O-C-H. It spells it right, unlike this book. Buys some fabric, it's very Sound of Music, so that she can make clothes for the children. And then she thinks about once her brother straightens up, maybe he could earn a place in Major Adams' regard. But for her, she could never tell Major Adams about her previous life. Women weren't given the same forgiveness as men. And I was like, oh, that feels oddly progressive for this book. While Louisa hadn't come to Fort Reno with the intent to deceive anyone, continuing the deception had become necessary. She meets up with her brother in the night under the cover of darkness, which of course Major Adams, who's like the manliest man, witnesses because he knows everything, because he is, you know, like every male love interest in a Christian romance book, he is as close to God as you can get. Omniscient! Anyway, meeting up with her brother Bradley, he's like, what in tarnation are you doing here? Of course it's what in tarnation.
Our town is turning into shit.
She's like, oh, I'm a governess for Major Adams. And he's like, you, a governess? You've spent less time in school than a cat spends in water, which is actually kind of a funny saying. And I can't believe Major Adams would hire my sister. She's like, yeah, he doesn't know about that connection between us. She's like, you need to shape up. I'm going to keep this job. I want you to perform well. You need this enlistment. You need to stop fucking around. She doesn't say fucking around. And he's like, don't you think I'm trying? He's like, he never makes any good decisions. What do you think the major will do when he finds out that a dance hall singer has been living under his roof and spending time with his girls? His nose wrinkled as if disgusted by the very thought of her, but just as quickly he softened. Look, I didn't mean it that way. I'm not embarrassed by who you are, but I am embarrassed that you're here. Anyway, we shift over to Daniel's POV, and he's witnessing this conversation, but in his mind, he's thinking that there was like a connection formed between the two of them, and that they're like, you know, flirting under the cover of darkness. So when she gets back inside, he strikes a match, and she's like, oh, I didn't know that you were there. How startled I was to hear someone entering my house at this time of night. And he's like, why were you talking to him? Are you lonely? It must be difficult for you here with the girls every day, but that is the task you've taken. We could go to Darlington more often if you'd like to socialize with the ladies there, whatever it takes. I want you to be content. You're doing a good job with my daughters and I don't want you to leave. It was just a conversation, dude. Calm down. In the next chapter, he's thinking, maybe she just really wants to talk to other adults. Maybe it's hard being around kids all the time. And I'm like, it is hard being around other, like, just kids all the time. He wanted to help her, and the only remedy was to see that she didn't find herself lonely again. If necessary, he was willing to sacrifice his own time to entertain her. In fact, he had a pastime she might find diverting enough to keep her out of trouble once his girls were asleep. And I thought that this was genuinely making like a wink-wink moment. He's talking about chess. What were you thinking of?
What do you like to do? Oh, I don't know. Play chess. Screw. Well, let's play chess.
He tells her, I realize now that you're the one who's been messing with my chessboard. This is great. I haven't had a real opponent in forever. And then they have a conversation about the fact that he was standing on his horse when she met him. What are you doing in here? It's Raven. Oh, she has a lot to say. She's probably hiding from my son. And he's like, yeah, I'm really embarrassed about that. Standing on my horse was a really stupid decision. I just wanted to see that I could do it because I saw this other guy do it, which is actually her brother. He wants to emulate her brother. Ha! All men are the same. They just want to reflect each other. Anyway, of the accident of him falling off his horse, he says that the part he remembers best is her holding his head in her lap, which is as close to, flirting as these people are going to get for now. He gets a letter because he requested some information from the Mennonite missionary about his, replacement governess because she was not supposed to be the governess that he got. And so he gets this letter back and he decides in a very dramatic moment to burn it because he's like, I'm deciding to trust Miss Bell. And I'm like, okay, but did you need to burn it? Okay, that's fine. And then he writes his own letter, this letter professing his feelings about how much he adores her. He's about to misplace it, of course. And then we hear more about the conflict between the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, and the Cowboys. Not too long ago, a prominent Cheyenne dog soldier by the name of Running Buffalo had been accused of trying to steal ponies from a Texas herd passing through the reservation. When the Cowboys had tried to recover the ponies, guns were drawn and Running Buffalo was shot down. Running Buffalo's family had then cornered the Texans in a stone bakery where they were surrounded until the cavalry could rescue them. Frustrated that the troopers hadn't allowed them to enact their own justice, the dog soldiers refused to allow their people to participate in the yearly census of the tribe. They stood outside the agency office to scare away anyone who thought to cooperate with Agent Dyer's mandate. Now there was more trouble, but this time with the cattle, not ponies. And Bradley had been chosen for the small band that would protect the fort's interpreter as he tried to get an accurate report on the goings-on. And now 600 or 700 Cheyenne warriors are headed this way, led by Old Crow. Coyote and White Horse are going to another guy named Agent Dyer who lives in Darlington, which is the city nearby, to warn the others because Old Crow is on the warpath. Meanwhile, our fake governess has been teaching the girls to sing in Italian, to paint, which Daisy is quite good at, and also they've been working on seamstress work, and Daisy gets a dress with some, quote, Indian beadwork made. One of them does it, either Daisy herself or Louisa does it. And I'm like, I just feel like that's kind of inappropriate that you would just steal that. And also you called it a costume. So I don't know that that's a good idea. Anyway, the point is that this is all there to make it seem or to actually say out loud, she smiled so easily. Joy, that was Daisy. And this is very oh, we're falling in love with Daisy. Daisy could be Louisa's own daughter. It's just very sickly sweet. It doesn't really feel very earned. They talk about the fact that she herself can sing very well. And she's hoping that he'll ask her to sing for him, but also kind of nervous about it. He says, are you afraid I'd find your performance unladylike? And she's thinking well, I have to be above reproach all the time. And then he makes a comment about, it's not as if I'm going to dress up my innocent daughters in velvets and parade them on a stage in front of a crowd of rowdy men, which is basically what she used to do. So she feels kind of judged by this. So then because the 700 native folks are coming to attack, or they're on the warpath, as the book says, they get word that this is happening. So she sends the girls down to the cellar. If there was one thing that Daniel couldn't dwell on, it was what the Cheyenne did to their female captives. Probably this upper uprising was just a warning. Probably they weren't going to attempt a direct attack on the fort, but the fear was always there in the back of his mind, and if the dog soldiers prevail, a cellar wouldn't save them. Did we really need to do this? Did we really need to write this? So they set up the fort for like, they take in the people from Darlington, and they have a whole bunch of religious people show up, and she feels very awkward because she has to interact with them, and she's like, oh, I'm still supposed to be pulling off this facade that I too am a religious person. And it's funny because at one point, one of them comes up to her, and one of the cavalrymen come up to her. She does this, which is not a Mennonite thing. That's a Catholic thing. And they're like, aren't you supposed to be Mennonite? Agent Dyer, who is, I don't know, some sort of lawman, and the Major Adams argue about like what the best course of action is here. There's a general coming, and the hope is that they can all, talk to the indigenous folks and, work something out. Louisa asks Caroline, the older daughter, what the orders were from her father about the prayer service, and Caroline says, orders? He didn't have to order them to pray. It's what you do at times like this.
Our town is turning into shit.
Why were they eager to talk to a God who demanded the impossible, perfection from them? But then again, they were perfect. These women hadn't lived in the gutter like Louisa had. No wonder they wouldn't mind gathering to parade their holiness before each other. They had some. Louisa didn't. So this is one of those things I was talking about earlier with Christian media, where we set it up as this very black and white thing, where it's like, oh, Louisa here just doesn't understand that religious people sometimes don't reflect God. God is holy and perfect, and he thinks that you are loved and wonderful even if you are in sin. And that's a very black and white way of looking at God, because the fact is that when you think about God, and I don't want to I could be here for an hour and a half. When you think about God, you have to start asking logical questions, and they teach you not to, but like my logical question is, one of the questions that I kept coming back to that eventually made me like lose my faith was, didn't you set it up this way? This whole setup where I am sinful and need you, you set it up that way. That had nothing to do with me. And so you set it up for you to be the answer, which feels like a manipulation and not love. But if we start asking questions like that, books like these fall apart. So instead we set it up where it's just like, Louisa just doesn't understand. God is perfect and holy and loves you. Anyway, she's hanging out with all of the other religious people, and they're praying because that's what you do in times like this. What did God think of her sitting in this chapel pretending to be holy? He knew the truth. He knew she was no friend of his, so she ends up leaving because she gets so uncomfortable. And Daniel realizes that she's not hanging out with the other religious women, and he's like, why was she so uncomfortable with them? She's so confident whenever she's around like a bunch of soldiers, but then she gets around other religious women and she gets all weird. Anyways, they're still flirting throughout all of this, and she actually asks him to help her take her measurements. Scandal. And he's like, oh my God, her collarbones. And he's about to say some like, lovey-dovey words to her. And oh, by the way, she found his letter and she thinks that one of the cavalrymen wrote it to Caroline, which is one of those miscommunication things that starts to drive you nuts in this book. So he's about to like say something to her. We don't really know what, when they both hear pebbles being thrown at a window. They try to ignore it, and he says, during this emergency, I admire the progress you're making with Caroline and Daisy, or during this emergency, like you're doing so well during this, and you're perfectly suited to this station. And she's like, and she knows that the pebbles at the window are her brother trying to get her attention. She's hoping that he just won't notice that the pebbles are being thrown at the window, but she's like, yep, gotta go. And he's thinking, I have to keep her from making a mistake, because he thinks that she's going to meet Bradley for canoodling. She is going to meet Bradley because he's her brother. Again, this is one of those miscommunication things. And it's like, when they add it back to back, it starts to get a little bit much. And it says, could he be acting out of jealousy? But what other option did he have? Allow females under his protection to frolic at night with his troopers? It wasn't an issue of vanity, but of decency. And as distasteful as it was to thwart a rival By pulling rank, Daniel had no choice. So he like intercepts Bradley and tells him to basically fuck off. Bradley was there to give Louisa a gun because, you know, there's all of this like tension brewing between the indigenous folks and the cavalrymen and the cowboys, and they're all sort of there at one place. So the next day, since Bradley wasn't there when Louisa went outside, she finds an excuse to see him. He has to whitewash a fence, like he's doing grunt work because Major Adams makes him. And so he's whitewashing a fence, and Louisa is like, you should have known not to throw rocks when Major Adams was home. And Bradley's annoyed because he saw them through the window, and Major Adams had his arm around Louisa because he was helping take her measurements, so he misunderstood what was happening between the two of them. And then a little bit after this, what ends up happening is that Bradley, in an effort to save Daisy, who was getting stung by bees, protects Daisy and gets stung by all the bees. And Bradley's actually allergic to bees, which Louisa has mentioned before to Major Adams, but Major Adams forgets this. Anyways, the point is, Bradley gets stung by bees and he is allergic. Why did you do that? Always being stupid, rushing him when you shouldn't, Louisa says to him. What my sister calls stupid, the army calls heroic. There's a doctor, so they're able to get help for both Daisy and Bradley. Bee stings are the big, oh no moment here, which is hilarious. Bee stings? What is this, my girl? Well, in that case, it went so badly. Oh God. And Daniel goes to see Bradley and he's like annoyed with him still because he thinks that he's a rival. But then he realizes like, oh, Daisy's doing okay, but Bradley's doing real bad. Willis couldn't even communicate. He could barely breathe. When had he turned so cold to the suffering of others? Had the duties that kept him from his family also kept him from feeling? He'd been a fool to think he could stand between her and the man she so obviously loved. Putting away his own feelings, he took her hand. Louisa clung to it. So he says to Bradley, it feels wrong for me to sit here and talk to you about your sins when you just saved my daughter's life, but I'd be remiss if I didn't remind you that God is near. He waits to hear from you. He made you and loves you and offers you the most precious gift, himself, in the form of his son, Jesus. In Louisa's POV, it says, Louisa believed there was a God, but she didn't want to believe he'd be so cruel. Daniel's words still rang in her ears. God didn't care what you'd done or who you'd been? It wasn't too late to become his child? That didn't fit with what she'd experienced. She couldn't understand how she'd still had tears left to cry. Me neither, girlfriend. So that's another thing is they set up this thing where they're like, more people would be a Christian if they knew that God isn't some tyrant and God isn't reflected in the people who are so mean and judgmental. God is actually all love and you're his child. It's like, I don't really feel like his child unless he's like the most manipulative parent that I've ever heard of. But if that's your thing, like you do you. If it brings you joy to follow that religion, I'm happy for you. But it is not one size fits all, no matter how many times y'all press that. So she asks Major Adams, what you just said, Private Willis, did you say that because he's hurt or because he saved Daisy? What do you mean, Louisa? God has loved Private Willis from the beginning. He didn't earn God's love when he saved Daisy. I hope you're right, Louisa said, but what if you're wrong? Maybe God isn't there for him. Maybe he has to find his way alone. And Major Adams is like, oh, huh. And so in his POV, he goes, Louisa didn't know Christ. The revelation stunned him. He'd wondered about her reticence and thought it might be that as a Mennonite, she kept her religion private, but that didn't explain her reluctance to attend chapel services or her nervousness when he mentioned the missionaries at the agency. Louisa, God loves each of us, even though we're all flawed. But someone tainted, like Private Willis, for example, they can't come near God. God wouldn't allow it. He's too holy. Louisa, that's where Jesus comes in. He lived here on earth among us, but he lived without ever sinning. He did what we couldn't do, and then he paid our penalty so that we are forgiven. Ah, good old penal substitution. All we have to do is confess our sins to God and ask him to accept Jesus' sacrifice on our behalf. I'm confused, Louisa said. I mean, I know all of this, of course, but I was just surprised you said it to Private Willis, that's all. And she's like, oh, I can't. He's gonna know. They're gonna know. So then she thinks, oh, in her own POV, perhaps her one terrible experience at a church hadn't been because of God. Perhaps the people who claimed him could be mean and hateful at times, just like everyone else. Perhaps they were loved by God, but frustrated him at the same time, like Bradley and his wild ways embarrassed her. From her intentionally limited contact with the agency women, Louisa hadn't experienced the censure she'd expected. And then, of course, she compares the conversations she's had with the religious women to the women at the Cat Eye Saloon. Was like comparing the purest spring water to swill. Wow, that's a great way to talk about other humans. No petty bickering, no conniving manipulations. Whatever differences and conflict did arise, were usually brushed aside quickly and neatly. If God could turn her into a woman like that, Louisa would volunteer immediately. But there was a complication. God had expectations, and Louisa couldn't take so God basically has rules, and Louisa's going to have trouble with that. Daniel talks to Bradley, her brother, again, and said, you knew that the Hornets were going to be deadly for you when you saved Daisy. And Bradley said, I joined the cavalry to help my country to make a difference. If saving a child's life doesn't fit that description, then I don't know what was.
Little bastard shot me in the ass.
And Daniel's like, I know your secret. I know you're into Miss Bell. You're a young, reckless man, but many young, reckless men sow their wild oats, then travel on to the next excitement. But Miss Bell will be held to a higher standard. Her reputation and livelihood are in jeopardy. And Bradley's like, it was her idea. And just like that, Daniel wanted to throttle him, but he mastered the urge and continued, I hardly advise you not to interrupt me again. Oh my God, what a man. What a babe. If you wish to court her properly, then consider the grave danger you place yourself in on behalf of my daughter. What? The point is, if you want to court Miss Bell, you have my blessing. And it says, instead of giving his thanks, as Daniel expected, Private Willis burst into laughter. And he goes, Louisa is my sister. That's why she's been here to see me. And by the way, she showed me your letter. I told her to show it to you. I really enjoyed it. So him and Louisa go on a nice dinner together in the middle of all of this conflict. And he admits that he loves her. Then after this, the conflict thing occurs where they all sit down, and Daisy, the daughter, decides to run out the house and go to the meeting in her, half-baked effort to look like a native woman. She shows up, and of course, one of the indigenous guys there thinks that she is adorable. Daisy stood framed by the door with feathers randomly protruding from her braids. I came for the treaty, Pa. Am I too late? So Stonecalf is asking about Daisy. Stonecalf is the indigenous man who is having everything he's saying translated by a indigenous boy who's with him. The boy is telling him that that's your daughter, and you've let her play with the girls at the Arapaho school. Stonecalf said he will only talk to Major Adams, and he wants the generals to leave, or the council is over. And they want your daughter to stay too. They say it's important for the young ones to know what is decided so that they will keep the treaties in the future. Hooray! Daniel's meeting has been a success. While he couldn't change the terms of the treaty, he could offer more help. If the Cheyenne would skip their slaughter of the cows for 1 week, Daniel would send his men to build a corral for a tribal herd. Perhaps before the Bureau, assumedly the Bureau of Indian Affairs, cut their rations again, they would be able to supply their own meat and milk. Independence was what everyone craved for the Cheyenne and Arapaho. Was it what everyone craved? I feel like the U.S. government doesn't really crave the independence of the Cheyenne and the Arapaho. Just looking back from where I am in the future, I feel like that's not true. But they all needed to get a realistic picture of what that would look like. I'll have you know that they actually had independence before we showed up here. Daniel stood on his porch and watched as the chiefs rode proudly away. They'd gotten the government's attention, so they were satisfied. No bloodshed showed a developing restraint on their part. That feels icky to say. Wow, they couldn't develop restraint until they talked to you, a white man? Wow, how great. The last of the agency workers and Mennonite missionaries had been escorted back to Darlington. And then who shows up is the actual Mennonite governess who was supposed to replace the lady who got hay fever. And she is immediately not the right fit. She is so mean. She snaps at the girls. And then he realizes, wait, so if this is the replacement, then Miss Bell is who? Louisa is who? Louisa was not who he thought she was. Hadn't he known it though? Why else had he decided he'd rather burn that letter than read it? Okay, then what is the point of this? And so he tells the lady to leave. She's like, I think you'll regret this decision. I don't think you should let this woman who misled you into your household. Caroline is like, wait, Miss Bell's not a not a governess? And Major Adams is like, well, she's been teaching you, hasn't she? He proposes to her and she's like, I can't do this, because he still doesn't know that she was a stage performer. That's what's keeping them apart. Can you tell me what the big secret is? Can you tell me what great obstacle is keeping you from what you want? From what I want? I've offered you my love, my hand, my family, everything I have. You're too kind to toy with me, and you haven't refused me, and when I touch you, you don't reject my caresses. Not his caresses. I've treated you as a sister, trying not to take advantage of your proximity, but your responses are anything but sisterly. Louisa, if you have some reservation about my character or about my devotion, you can tell me. If you don't don't desire that we be united. Give me a reason and I'll stop pursuing you, but I'm very afraid I can't stop loving you. She tells him she's been having a lot of doubts. She's been thinking a lot about God. I can't imagine what a struggle you've had trying to hide these doubts, but there's no reason to keep fighting. There's nothing on earth that can take the place of a relationship with God. No matter what else you decide tonight, that's the most important. I can't marry you. In fact, you need to find another governess for Caroline and Daisy. This isn't what I'm supposed to be doing. And he's like, you think that God is telling you to leave? It's not right for me to be here. I know that. It's not who I am. But I love who you are. You don't know me, she says. This is so dramatic for no reason. Louisa, I'm telling you the truth. I know something isn't right. I've known since you arrived, and I've waited for you to learn to trust me. If you leave without ever testing my trust, blah, 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 I've been hasty. When I learned that Bradley was your brother, I assumed my way was clear. I rushed into a decision, but there's no hurry. You can keep doing lessons with Caroline and Daisy. We'll give it more time. Nothing has to change. We don't have to get married. She's like, everything has changed. I've been hiding from God for too long. Because of my conscience, I can't keep going. Just drama for drama's sake. And he's like, the one opponent I dare not cross. How can I compete with God? This is so dumb. His mother-in-law shows up, and then they're all supposed to perform. Like Louisa's, like the girls are doing a performance. Louisa's doing a performance. They're all singing. There's like a general there or some shit. There are some dudes there, cowboys, who recognize her as Lovely Lola. They start a brawl in the back, and Daniel's like, what the fuck is going on? That woman is the Lovely Lola Bell. She's a stage performer at the Cat Eye Saloon in Wichita, and she ain't no lady. And then he punches that dude in the face. It says, so much for gaining control. Yeah, but when men lose control, it's fine. It's immediately forgiven. So Louise is like, I need to leave. I need to leave tonight. I need to get out of here.
What is there to live for on the frontier in 1882?
The mother-in-law and Daniel get into a fight. You have no business interfering with my family. If I can convince myself that your intentions are unselfish, then we'll arrange for you to see the girls. But if you continue to insult this fine lady, Miss Bell, the stage performer / governess / newly found Christian, there's no reason for me to allow you to disrupt the peace of our household. And he tells Louisa, by the way, you're not leaving tonight. You have to face Caroline and Daisy. They deserve an explanation. And then there's your brother. He's locked up in the guardhouse because he got into it with other people over you. You're going to leave without saying a word to him? Daisy and Caroline are like, you can't leave us. We love you. I want to stay here. I don't want to go with Grandmama. She talks to Bradley and he's like, where the freak are you going to go? Back to the Cat Eye Saloon? You don't even have a job there. And the Major's cool. He said he'll help us come up with a plan. So then she goes and talks to Major Adams one more time and he says, let's do a chess match to decide what happens.
Play chess? Screw.
All night I thought about how best to settle this problem. I had a long talk with your brother and I came up with a solution. If you win, you can go, but if I win, you marry me. I don't love that. I wish that he would have given her the choice, like, all right, what do you want to do? If you win, you get what? If I win, I get what? What that man said about me is true. I know, he says, but you have to play me and win if you want to leave. You can't be happy that I was a stage performer. You're right. I'd be ridiculous for me to pretend that it won't affect the way people see you and the way they see us. All she did was put some velvets on and go sing some songs in Italian. What is the problem? Man, this is so separated from, like, it's almost, 150 years later. This is very different. I don't know what y'all are complaining about. He's like, where will you go? She's like, well, maybe I'll actually become a teacher. I can get my certificates. I can learn reading and writing and arithmetic. And he says, why not stay here? Everyone at the fort and probably everyone at Darlington knows about me now. I can't stay here. You talk like Lovely Lola was an evil, wicked person, but I don't have that opinion at all. Was Lovely Lola selfish? No, it seems she loved and sacrificed for her brother. Was Lola stealing from people or hurting people? No, she worked for her wages. She was a woman of character before she arrived at Fort Reno. The important things about her were all true. But my conscience, how can I keep pretending? God knows and I can't disappoint him. What pretending? Tell everyone you used to be a singer. I don't care if it's the truth. And I'm like, wait, so what were the stakes again? What was the problem? Are you sure you want me to stay? I'm about to beat you with 6 pawns and a king. What do you think? I think this is the worst chess match I've ever played. So they decide they won't elope in the morning because a proper lady wouldn't do that, so they'll need a few weeks. You have my heart, he says. I'll take good care of it, I promise. The end. Yay! We did it! We did another Christian romance. Obviously, this one was not nearly as bad as Redeeming Love. There is some stuff that made me a little uncomfortable. There is that, black and white thinking about religious ideas and very easy answers, but there was a couple of charming things in this, and at least it was written on a line level well, which I still feel like Redeeming Love really wasn't. Though I will say that writing conventions have changed over time, and this is more new than Redeeming Love is. So this gets, I gave it a 2 on Goodreads, I think. if I manage to remember to put the star rating on there, but I'll give it a 2 on Goodreads. It is better than Redeeming Love, which I would give 0 stars if I had the opportunity to do that on Goodreads. Fuck that book. But it does feel like quite a bit of things were ripped off from The Sound of Music, which is a weird choice, but all things considered, I guess it's not a bad book when you compare it to Redeeming Love, but it's still not a very good book, and I just don't know why we write about Indigenous people this way. I don't know, just like imagine being Indigenous and reading this book and how that would feel. Anyways, that was Holding the Fort by Regina Jennings. I do want to read more Christian books. I think some of them are really funny. Like the Christian dystopian ones are so funny, a little bit enraging, but often funny. But Christian romance books are honestly kind of easy to get through as long as they don't have like really harmful rhetoric in them. It didn't take a lot out of me to read it because there was that scene in Redeeming Love that drained me of all life and energy where he assaults her, in my opinion, and it's passed off as a good, loving thing. Christians really do not like that I interpret it that way, but that's what it looks like to me. So at least this didn't have that. At least this didn't have that. But I still don't like the way that we talked about sex work and other things. I don't really know why we demonized her being a stage worker, though I guess that's like, social conventions at the time, I guess. I don't know. Let me know if you've read this or what your favorite or least favorite Christian romance book is down below. If you made it this far, you can leave a B for Bradley's bee stings down below. Poor Bradley. He just got the shit kicked out of him in this book. So leave a B for Bradley down below. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my patron who requested this. This was a good learning exercise in determining whether or not I'm being fair to Christian books, and saying whether things are personal preference or actually harmful. So good exercise in reading. Anyways, all right. Comments and questions down below. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.
And before I go, I have to say thank you for being a friend to my Therapy Bills patrons, and those are Alexander, Andy Mason, Ashley H, Astra, Barry B, Call Me Kodiak, Choco's Homesick for Taiwan, DJ Rocktopus, Ellie, Emerald Dodge, Eric D, Jade L, John E, K, Kaleno K, Katie Ann, Quinn, Lady Kittybug, Lady Chips, Lemon Jelly. Y'all put food in your name, and I'm always doing this at lunchtime and I always get hungry. Lex, Other Lex, Lily, Mataraptor, Megwin Rose, Melissa, Minby, Mixer Boneless, Alice, Peggy Lou, Rain, Reese, SJ, Scarlett, Samar, SMK, Spoopy, Steph B, 3 raccoons in a trench coat, Tori, Urchin Audrey, White Raven 13, and Zorvictia. Thank you all so much for being here and for being a friend. And last but not least, I also have to say a big thank you to my Potato Search Marxist patrons, and those are Adrian, Aaron, Alejandra, Alicia's Last Frayed Nerve, Althea, Amanda D, Angelica, Artie the Ninth, Ava, Bari the Witch, Beck, Blythe Lavender, Bookish by Jenna, Bookish Rabbit, Bree, Bridget G. Collins, Kate B, Caitlin, Carlin, Carly, Casper, Kate, Kathy, Celeste, Claire Online, Cole, Colleen, Corwin, Courtney, Darius, Danielle, Danita, Darren, Desiree Michelle, DILF Enthusiast, Silco Apologist Era. Good shit. Dorian, Dorothea supports public education. Hell yeah. Draco-chan, Drive-By Thinker, Ebby, Emily A, Emma, Aaron with 2 E's, Aaron Starlight, Fiona, Gadarn, Halia Artisan, Hannah C, Helen, Harising, JM Tennant, Jay is on Olympus, Jelly V, Jen Michelle, Genderqueer, Jenny G, Jessa Sue, Jill, Jojo Bookish, Juicy Wizard, Kai Brecker has not read 6 of Crows, Caitlin, Catherine, Katie L, Katrina, Kaylee, Kayala, Kendra, KMTV, Kayana, Laughing Cat Dog, Laura is Angry, Lauren G, Lazarus Ray, Lindsay M, Lisa B, Lisa L, LP, Lou Siri, Lustful Octopus, Martin, Macy Jane, Maddie, Madison, Man-Eating Plant, Mary, Megan, Malara, May, Morgan, Myth Lesbian, Never, Nicole G, Nicole R, Paige P, Paul, Penelope, Penny Shilling, Foxglove, Plague Carrier, Queen Cereal, Rachel B, Reba, Rebecca R, Rhea, Ronnie, Rosie Thorns, Sikoria, Saintbringer, Sakyalume, Sarah H, Sarah the Bear, Shamed, Shannon, Sheen Onion, Sean, Sophie, Stardust, T Delegati, Talia, That Nerdy Mystic, That One Cute Chick, This Is Not a Trap, Tiana, Too Thick to Work Today. Oh my gosh, I forget how unhinged it gets at the end. Triple M, Taito Phoenix, Unicorn Jenny, Waves, Wobbs, Writer A, and last but not least, Zayden's award-winning Eggplant. Thank you all so much for being here and for being a friend.